Hi, I'm J.A. Brown, and this Thursday I'll be presenting at the Moving Humanities conference at Radboud University, which is where I study, at the philosophy faculty. The theme of the conference is Finding Meaning, and my presentation is titled The Meming of Meaning. It's about meaning and about memes. Now, this is supposed to be a 20-minute presentation, but I'm not sure if I can cram all this information into 20 minutes. So what I thought I would do is just record it and put it out here on YouTube for you guys. And then maybe you can give me some comments, some thoughts about which parts could be shorter, where I could talk faster, or maybe some parts could be left out completely. So please just look at it and tell me what you think. Oh, by the way, this video was made possible by my buddy Nico from Polymath University, who made his video equipment available to me so that I could record this. I'll link to his channel in the description. Make sure to check him out. His videos are really cool. So thanks, Nico. Alright, so I'm just going to present and see how long it takes. So this presentation is titled The Meming of Meaning, as the theme of the conference is Finding Meaning. So, as you know, I'm J.A. Brown. I like to think of myself as a meaning scientist, and I'll come back about what that means in just a minute. I have a BA in linguistics from University of Amsterdam. Right now I'm finishing my MA in general linguistics at Radboud University, which is in Nijmegen, another city in the Netherlands. And I'm also doing my research master's degree in linguistics and communication sciences there right now, as well as my internship at the Donder Center for Cognition, where I work with a computational model on visual word recognition, especially in the area of multiple mappings between form and meaning. So cases where you have one word and two meanings, or two words with the same meaning. So you could say it's about semantics. So, let me just give you a glimpse of what this presentation is all about. If you would just look at this for a second, you can see there's a whole bunch of stuff in here, but we'll go through it one by one. So first I'll talk about what meaning is, then I'll talk about, then I'll go a bit deeper into meaning. So first we'll talk about certain concepts like isomorphism, translation, metaphor, perception, and then I will talk about one of the most important bits, emic knowledge, and we'll see how that relates to translation and then to internet memes, which have their own grammar. And then we'll look at how internet memes are culturally transmitted, and by extension also other memes. And then we'll look at the argument of meanings as species versus meanings as memes. And finally, before the take-home message, I'll talk a bit about things that are not memes. So, what is meaning? There was an essay by Hilary Putnam, very famous essay from 1975, about the meaning of meaning. Daniel Everett in his book says, meaning is the roadmap of our existence. Of course, there was also another book titled Maps of Meaning, and somebody made a meme with maps of meming. But let's also keep in mind that Korzybski already said in the 1930s that the map is not a territory. This is just to show you that meaning is a concept that has been at the forefront of discussion for a long time in various disciplines. Here's another one from Everett. He says, perhaps the biggest question of our existence is, what is the meaning of life? But, you know, when you talk about meaning, one question you can ask is, which meaning exactly are you talking about? Because the word meaning has multiple meanings. For example, in linguistics, when we talk about meaning, we're usually talking about semantics, so the meaning of words and morphemes and so on. Whereas in philosophy, we often talk about the relationship between signs and what they signify, which is known as semiotics. And also in philosophy, there's another kind of meaning, which relates more to the meaning of life and so on, what things mean for someone, which is, I call it here, existential meaning. Now, I will be arguing that all these different senses of meaning are in fact related and that they are parts of the same whole. For example, here, this is how I represent this relationship. Semantics is a special case of semiotics. That's because words are also signs that refer to things. That's not all words do, of course, but it is one thing they do. So, in that sense, semantics is a special case of semiotics. But I believe that there's another step up that you can take when you add the existential part of meaning to it, and that's what I call meaning science. So what exactly is meaning science? This is a quick sketch that I drew of what I believe meaning science looks like. I wanted to do this in a neater way with a proper Venn diagram and so on, but this is a bit messy, but you can maybe see that here is all these areas like linguistics, cognitive science, psychology, philosophy, evolutionary biology, even computer science, and they all have areas of overlap. And I believe that these areas where they overlap all have something to do with meaning. There's also, I've mentioned here, general semantics, which also has a lot to do with meaning, and I think it's criminally underrated. That's the work of Alfred Korzybski and others. Anyway, I believe that if you really want to study what meaning is, then you need all of these disciplines to look at it, because it's a very multifaceted thing. So, here's another thing about meaning. So there are memes about meaning. Now, there's a whole hierarchy of memes, as you no doubt know. The best quality internet memes, we're talking about internet memes here, which is a special case of memes. The best quality memes are known as dank memes. Now, I'm not sure if this particular meme is dank, but it is a meme about dank memes, so I guess that makes it a meta dank meme. This is an example of a stale meme, which is a meme that maybe used to be funny, but, well, got stale and is not funny anymore. And then there's also forced memes. Here's an example of a forced meme, which I guess are memes that were never funny to begin with, but people tried to force them into, let's say, the meme pool. So far so good. Now, I think that if you want to answer the questions, what is meaning and what are memes, perhaps you need both of those questions to sort of answer each other. So here's a drawing by Escher. I think it's called Drawing Hands. There's the two hands that draw each other. So I think that perhaps the relationship between meanings and memes is like this. So I'll tell you what I mean by that. So here are three key concepts for my presentation. I took this from the work of Doug Hofstadter from his book Gödel, Escher, Bach. The three concepts are self-ref, which is the property of something referring back to itself, self-rep, which is something reproducing itself, and isomorphism. Now, especially this last one is key. Hofstadter himself writes, I claim that it is perceptions of isomorphism which create meanings in the minds of people. So clearly this is very important to how people create meaning. And an isomorphism is basically a mapping where you map parts of a whole onto parts of another whole, so that each part in the one fulfills roughly the same role in the whole as in the other. I'll show you what I mean by that. So you can say Canada is the Russia of America, for example. That's an analogy of the kind that is known as a snow clone. In particular, the snow clone X is the Y of Z. And I'll show you how it works. For example, you can map the location of Canada, which is in the north of America, to Russia's location in the north of Eurasia. You can map the size of one onto the size of the other. They're both cold. They both have tundras. You can map the wildlife, the flora and fauna, of one onto the other. In both countries you have indigenous peoples and their cultures. You can make this mapping. I think you can even do this and this. Note, by the way, that east and west are reversed here. With the same goes for the seas. And both of them have areas with a lot of oil. But it's not entirely clear what Quebec corresponds to in this analogy. So all of these isomorphisms are necessarily incomplete, because if you could map each part of one onto a part of the other, then the two things would be essentially the same. So there's always at some level a mapping that you can't make. So they're necessarily incomplete, but they're complete enough that people get these isomorphisms. They understand them intuitively. And so finally, I very much doubt that this is an isomorphism you can make. So as you can see, we have this whole analogy, Canada is the Russia of America, that's made possible through a whole set of isomorphisms. Now, let me talk to you for a second about translation. If you're trying to translate one sentence or a word or any meaning from one language to the other, that involves isomorphism. You could say, in a sense, text in one language is isomorphous to its equivalent in another language. And Hofstadter discusses this at length in the book. But how exactly does this work? Well, you might think you can start by just mapping each word. Let's say you're translating this sentence. This is a German sentence, der Bär fängt den Lachs, which means the bear catches the salmon. Let's say that you want to translate this sentence to English. Now, you could do that by mapping each German word onto an English word. So then you get something like the bear catches the salmon. So in this case that works. But obviously there are many cases in which it doesn't work. For example, in German you can change the cases and then you keep the word order the same, and then you get den Bären fängt der Lachs, which means the salmon catches the bear. Now if you use the same method to translate this, you get again the bear catches the salmon. And note that all of these isomorphisms in isolation work. You can translate all these individual words to their English counterparts this way, but when you put them together, they're not correct anymore because the word order is different. So clearly this doesn't work. You might think a better idea would be to, yeah, this is false. So a better idea would be to map the whole sentence as a whole to its English counterpart. Then you can map this onto the salmon catches the bear. So keep this in mind for a second because we'll get back to it. Another example of isomorphism that we use a lot in our thinking is metaphor. This is Hofstadter again, who has a talk at Stanford called Analogy as the Core of Cognition. I really recommend it, in which he argues that basically analogy is the core of our cognition. There's also the work of George Lakoff and his colleagues. Lakoff and Johnson, Metaphors We Live By, show these examples like he was red with anger, which means he was really angry. This is still a case of metonymy, because people are, you know, their face sometimes actually gets red when they're angry. But you can extend this mapping and then say he was seething with anger, and that's a metaphor. And then you can also say I was so angry I felt like I was about to explode. So this is what they call conceptual metaphor, in which one domain gets mapped onto another domain. In this case, something like temperature or pressure gets mapped onto emotion. As you can see, this also works through the use of isomorphisms. And as we'll see in a moment, metaphors are memes. And what's also important about metaphors is that they're embodied, which means that they are based on our physical experience of going through the world in our bodies. So, perception always necessarily involves abstraction, because there's a whole bunch of stuff, right? The world is made of a whole bunch of stuff, and we can impossibly perceive all of it. Instead, what we do, and not only humans do this, but all organisms that can perceive, we filter the world through what's important to us. So we focus our attention on that which is relevant for our survival and our reproduction and so on. Here's an example. When you see a tiger, you cannot perceive a tiger without understanding that a tiger is a predator. So in that sense, your visual experience of a tiger, or your experience of encountering a tiger, is in a sense a sign that stands for, oh boy, you better watch out, because if you don't run now, you'll probably be dead in a couple minutes. So in that sense, a tiger means predator. And when you see mushrooms, that means food, or depending on the mushroom, it might mean other things. So you can see there's this chain that goes from the thing itself to the relation between the thing and us, our bodies, to our perception of the thing, to our concept for the thing, to a symbol that we may have for the thing, such as a word. This is in order of increasing abstraction. Okay, so far so good. Now I want to come to a very important point in my presentation, which is Everett's notion of emic grammar. So Dan Everett, one of my favorite linguists, he's written a book titled Dark Matter of the Mind, in which he discusses this. For example, if you're not familiar with the emic versus etic distinction, it's the distinction between something as observed by an outsider, objectively, let's say, and something as observed by a member of a culture. So something can be a part of a language, a sound or a word, or any cultural artifact like a tradition or a way of dressing or a certain cultural object. And Everett says that the emic perspective, so the perspective of inside the culture, comes from knowledge that is tacit, that's learned, and cultural. So these are the things that you know, but you're not aware that you know. He calls this dark matter of the mind. So he says, he has this quote, this is how emicization works, so this is how you internalize the knowledge that's in your culture. He also phrases it as the tacit knowledge we acquire from lived experience. So this is implicit knowledge. It can be made explicit, but most of the time it's not explicit. And again, I argue that this type of knowledge is made up of memes. Now I want to take a moment to discuss meaning as it relates to the meaning of words. So when you are trying to discuss what a word means, you first have to know what's a word. It seems like a straightforward question, but it isn't. In linguistics, we distinguish an orthographic word from a phonological word, and there's other kinds of words like morphological words, prosodic words, semantic words. If you're naive, you might say a word is anything with two spaces around it in writing, but that doesn't really work when you think about it. For example, in English, you have compound words like desk chair, that has a space in the middle, and not to mention that many languages, in fact most languages, aren't even written. So how exactly do you pick out a word, right? If you speak, the signal is just a continuous signal. There's no word boundaries in speech. So here's an example from a language called Sesotho, which is spoken in Lesotho and also in South Africa. And this word, kitlautusa, means I will help you. So this language uses an orthography that's called a disjunctive orthography, which means that all of these parts of the word are written as separate words, even though they're not words. This is a single word that has 3 spaces in it. These are what linguists call bound morphemes. Now compare this to the equivalent in isiZulu, also spoken in South Africa, which is, there was no pronunciation for this, but I think it's Ngizakusiza. And this is written without spaces, because this language uses a so-called conjunctive orthography. Now, what happens if you try to machine translate this? Here's Google Translate. I put in the Zulu word and it comes out in English as I will help you. So that it can do. But when I write in Sesotho, the whole phrase also comes out as I will help you, so that's fine. But now I enter the individual orthographic words, making the translator think that they are words, and I get absolute nonsense. So machine translation isn't really equipped to deal with this sort of thing. And in fact, a lot of machine translation originally was based on English, of course, and people are developing now different ways of dealing with morphologically complex languages and languages that have complicated orthographies like this one. So, here's another example from machine translation. This was from the early days of machine translation, a very famous example, which may or may not be a real example, but it's very famous. So here's a sentence: the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak, which is from the Bible. Now, they translated this from English to Russian. This was in the days of the Cold War, when they needed to translate between English and Russian. And then to check the translation, they translated it from Russian back to English. And then what came out was, the whiskey is promising, but the meat is rotten. Now, obviously that doesn't work at all. So what goes wrong there? Well, all of these words have multiple meanings. And if you're a machine translator that translates word for word, well, how do you know which word to pick? So let's say that you're an AI and you're trying to translate this sentence word by word, simply going left to right. Start with the. Well, there's no Russian equivalent, so you just leave that out, that's fine. Then you come to the word spirit. There's multiple translations for that. Which one do you pick? Well, maybe you could just use the most frequent one, but that doesn't always lead to the correct result. So nowadays, of course, machine translators are getting better and better, and they're learning to use the context and also semantics to do this. But what I'm trying to argue is that the reason this is a lot easier for humans than for machines is that we have the kind of emic knowledge that allows us to do this quickly. So, for example, let's take this sentence again and now add all of this emic knowledge. So that this is from the Bible, that it's from Matthew 26 verse 41, that the Bible is the holy book of Christianity, which is also important in Russian culture, so the Bible also exists in Russian, and that this sentence is used as a saying and also used as a saying in Russian. Because we know all of this stuff implicitly, we instantly understand that this is the equivalent to this in Russian. And now let's move on to memes. So I argue that just as there is an emic way that in which we know which role all of the components in our language and other cultural things fulfill, there is an equivalent emic way of looking at memes. So memes also have a grammar and they have components, which I like to call mememes. Now you might think this is a little bit silly, and it actually is a little bit silly, because the word meme, of course, is already derived from mimeme, to which I then added the em part, so now you get mememe. I like it because it's also the word me repeated 3 times. So it's both self-ref and self-rep. So what's a meme? Okay, let me show you. I got the idea while looking at these kind of what I like to call morphological memes, in which there's an isomorphism between the part of the thing and the part of the word. I think this one is very funny. And now the interesting thing is that there's various variations on this meme. For example, there's this one with Neapolitan. And as you can see, the components themselves change, but the function in the meme as a whole remains the same. So this is kind of similar to how language has a thing that linguists call double articulation, where you put sounds together to make a word, and then you put words together to make a sentence. So you have the place in the thing, and you fill each slot up with a filler. The filler being the sound in the case of the word, or the word in the case of the sentence. And you can extend this to paragraphs of text and discourse. And so I suggest that it works the same with internet memes. And the knowledge that we need to do this is emic and cultural, and it's what I would call the dark matter of the mind of memes. So memes have a grammar. Here's another example. Here's a meme called Loss, which was based on this webcomic. And now what people do is they represent this comic in all kinds of ways, which can be very abstract. So here are 3 different ones. Now, what's going on here? A pattern is reproduced each time. So there's 4 panels, 1 entity upright, 2 entities upright, 2 entities upright, 1 upright entity and a horizontal entity. And this can be transformed in all kinds of different ways, but the components and the way they come together to form the whole is the same. So these components are memes. Here's another example. This meme, I don't know what it's called, but it always involves 2 panels. In the top panel you have these 2 buttons with text, and in the bottom panel you have this guy wiping his forehead because he's sweaty because, well, he has trouble making the choice. So the memes here are the buttons, the text, and the guy. And in order to reproduce this meme successfully, you have to know certain things. For example, you have to know that the text on the 2 buttons should be 2 choices that are kind of contradictory, and that this meme is often used to expose the hypocrisy of someone. I think that's the prototypical way in which this meme is used. So this guy's head can also be replaced with someone else's head, or even with the logo of a company or the flag of a country. So those are different components that you can fill in the same spot, same role in the whole. So, and the funny thing is that if you spend a lot of time on the internet browsing memes, then you sort of intuitively understand this, even though nobody explained it to you. And that's how you learn to make good memes. And that's also how you learn to distinguish good memes from bad memes. And this knowledge is implicit. Now, some people have tried to make it explicit. For example, there's this site called Know Your Meme, where you can look up information about various memes. But I would say that going to Know Your Meme and learning about memes that way is kind of similar to learning a language from a grammar book. It's not at all similar to how people learn their native language. So, try programming an AI that generates internet memes. It would suck. Why? The memes would be unfunny. Why? Because, that's my argument, the AI lacks the required mememic knowledge, so the emic knowledge of the memes that enables it to make memes that are good, that are funny. And people actually did this, so we can check, see for yourself. This is from a paper from last year. These people actually made a neural network and fed it with memes until this came out. Now, do you think these memes are funny? I don't really think so. I think they're a bit weird. I don't think any human would make memes this way, or at least they would be considered bad examples of memes. Even though in this study it said that human subjects could not distinguish these memes from human-made memes. I think that's very silly. And I think that the way this AI makes memes is sort of similar to the guy in the Chinese room thought experiment from Searle, where he he gets past a sentence in Chinese from one side of the room, he doesn't read Chinese, and he writes down Chinese characters according to a big book with instructions that says you see this character and then you write down that character, and then he passes it on to someone on the other side of the room, and that way these people have a conversation in Chinese. But the guy in the middle doesn't actually understand anything about Chinese. That's about the level I think we are at right now when it comes to AIs that make memes. So, the question, are meanings memes? This book was written by Mark Richard. He's an Oxford philosopher, and well, as you can see, the title is Meanings as Species. He argues that it's better to think of meanings as species than as memes. Basically, his argument in a nutshell is that meanings are species because they're sort of a group of things that is roughly delineated, and it reproduces itself, but it can also change, and the way it changes is similar to the way that species of organisms change by natural selection. So, for example, if one word has multiple meanings, and then the environment changes in such a way that one of the meanings becomes used much more than the other, then maybe the other one will disappear, and that's how the meanings of words change. Now, I actually think it's quite a good argument, but he also says that thinking of meanings as memes is therefore not good, and that I don't agree with, which I've been trying to show you in this presentation. Interestingly, by the way, the word memes, or the notion of memes, was not originally intended by Dawkins, who first coined it, as something that actually exists. It's actually a metaphor, but somehow it was understood in this way as these units of cultural transmission, and that idea has taken on a life of its own. So you could say that the notion of meme has itself become a meme. One step further, I would also say that genes are a special case of memes. Why? Because genes contain information that, when read, allows for the same information to be reproduced again and again. So Dawkins's book, The Selfish Gene, might as well have been called The Selfish Meme. And I was pleasantly surprised to learn that there actually exists a book by that title, written by Kate Diston. There's another example in Hofstadter. I don't know if it's Gödel, Escherbach, or somewhere else, but he has this example of a text that contains instructions for changing around a garbled text so that it becomes the same text again. That's kind of similar to genes, in my opinion. Now, so far you've heard me say that many different things are memes. Let me briefly review some things that are not memes. An apple is not a meme, but the genetic information that's stored in the seed of the apple that tells you how to produce a new apple is a meme. A social gathering is not a meme, but the kind of emic knowledge that allows you to understand how to behave in a social gathering is a meme. A cloud is not a meme, but the knowledge that if you see a cloud, it's about to rain, it's a meme. So, now we can come to an operational definition of meme, And my definition is any information that is self-rep and passed down through successive generations. That is intentionally very broad, so it includes even things like genes. So, what I leave you with is this message. Meaning is both necessary for survival and inevitable for being. Meaning in semiotics and existential meaning are two special cases of the same thing. Remember this picture I showed at the beginning? We produce this meaning through the use of isomorphisms. Furthermore, linguistic semantics is also semiotics, and so it's part of that same habit that humans naturally have of producing meaningful patterns. And finally, meaning is information that's self-rep and transmitted from one generation to another. And therefore, I believe that we can think of meanings as memes. Now, here are a bunch of references. If you want to look at this at your leisure, you can download it from my website, jabrownswebsite.com. You can also go there to stay updated about my work and download my other academic writing. So it's about 35 minutes, which means I have to make it quite a bit shorter. So any comments, remarks, advice will be much appreciated. So this has been the presentation, hope you enjoyed. Make sure to subscribe to my channel for all the latest updates. Also hit the bell so you get notifications about my new videos. See you next time!